before history had kings with crowns of gold, before mighty empires stretched across continents, before Rome, Egypt at its peak, or the Great Wall of China, there was a land where humanity first dared to build something that had never existed before, a place where scattered villages transformed into the world's first true cities, where writing emerged from simple marks pressed into wet clay, where laws were carved to stone, where towering temples reached toward the heavens. This was Sumer, the birthplace of urban civilization. Yet today, those once glorious cities lie silent beneath the deserts of southern Iraq, their streets buried, their voices reduced to broken tablets and forgotten ruins. How could the civilization that taught the world how to build cities lose its own? And if the first great cities could fall, what does that say about every civilization that followed? More than 6,000 years ago, the southern plains of Mesopotamia looked very different from the landscape we see today. Fed by the winding waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the region was a patchwork of marshes, fertile floodplains, and shifting river channels. It was a land without forests, mountains, or abundant stone. Even timber was scarce. At first glance, it hardly seemed like the ideal place to create history. Yet necessity often becomes the mother of innovation. The people who settled here learned to shape mud into bricks, reeds into homes, and flowing water into life itself. They built canals that carried river water across dry fields, allowing agriculture to flourish in an environment that depended on careful management. According to archaeological evidence, these irrigation systems gradually expanded over centuries, supporting larger populations than had ever lived together before. As harvests grew, villages became towns. Towns came cities. And humanity crossed a threshold from which there would be no turning back. Among the earliest of these cities was Uruk, a settlement that eventually covered hundreds of hectares and may have housed tens of thousands of people. Current research indicates that by around 3200 BCE, Uruk was unlike anything the world had seen before. Massive temple complexes dominated its skyline. Specialized workers crafted pottery, textiles, tools, and jewelry. Merchants traveled vast distances, exchanging goods with distant lands. Managing such complexity required something entirely new. Memory was no longer enough. Someone needed to keep track of grain, livestock, labor, and trade. So they began pressing symbols into soft clay tablets. Those simple marks evolved into cuneiform, the earliest known writing system. It did not begin with poetry or epic tales. It began with accounting, lists of sheep, measurements of barley, records of taxes. Yet from those practical beginnings came literature, mathematics, legal systems, diplomacy, and recorded history itself. Humanity had discovered a way to preserve knowledge beyond a single lifetime. The written word changed everything. Generations no longer had to start from the beginning. Ideas could travel farther than people. Knowledge could survive its creators. It is difficult to overstate how revolutionary that was. At the center of every Sumerian city stood a towering temple known today as a ziggurat. Rising above flat plains, these stepped monuments symbolized the connection between earth and heaven. Each city honored its own patron deity, and religion shaped nearly every aspect of daily life. But these temples were more than sacred spaces. They functioned as economic centers, administrative headquarters, warehouses, and symbols of political authority. Priests managed land, organized labor, distributed food, and supervised major construction projects. In many ways, the temple stood at the heart of urban society. Around it stretched neighborhoods of mud brick homes, workshops buzzing with skilled craftsmen, marketplaces alive with trade, and fields that depended on an intricate network of canals. Life in the first cities was remarkably organized. Yet it was also fragile. Every harvest depended on water arriving at the right time. Every canal required maintenance. Every wall demanded repair. The larger the city became, the more carefully every system had to function. Success created complexity. Complexity created vulnerability. Unlike later empires ruled from a single capital, Sumer consisted of independent city-states. Uruk, Lagash, Kish, Eridu, Nippur, and many others each governed themselves. Every city possessed its own ruler, religious traditions, economic interests, and military forces. Sometimes they cooperated, often competed. Ancient inscriptions describe alliances, disputes over farmland, conflicts over water rights, and struggles for regional influence. Researchers believe that competition between neighboring cities became an almost permanent feature of Sumerian politics. Water itself could become a weapon. Control an upstream canal, and downstream farms might suffer. Redirect irrigation, and entire communities could face hardship. In a world where survival depended upon agriculture, controlling rivers often meant controlling power. Yet despite rivalry, these cities shared language, culture, religious beliefs, and technological innovations. Their competition sometimes accelerated progress, as each city sought greater prosperity, stronger defenses, and more impressive monuments than its neighbors. Great achievements often emerge from intense competition. So, great dangers. Over time, ambitious rulers sought to unite larger territories under their authority. One of the earliest known examples appears in the reign of Enatum of Lagash, whose inscriptions celebrate military victories over rival cities. These records represent some of humanity's earliest surviving accounts of organized warfare. Centuries later came an even greater transformation. Around the 24th century BCE, a ruler named Sargon rose to power. According to later traditions, Sargon began life in humble circumstances, though the details remain uncertain and may include legendary elements. What is better supported by historical evidence is that he built one of the world's first multinational empires. His Akkadian empire extended far beyond Sumer itself. For the first time, numerous city-states found themselves under centralized rule. Trade expanded. Administrative systems grew increasingly sophisticated. Imperial authority replaced many local rivalries. Yet empire carried its own challenges. Maintaining control across vast territories required constant resources, loyal officials, reliable communication, and military strength. History repeatedly shows that expansion can magnify both success and weakness. Eventually, the Akkadian Empire declined. Why remains a subject of ongoing research. Some historians emphasize internal political instability. Others point to external invasions. Climate may also have played a significant role. According to geological evidence collected from multiple sites across the region, parts of Mesopotamia experienced periods of increasing aridity during the late Therm in BCE. Some researchers argue that prolonged drought reduced agricultural productivity, weakened economies, and contributed to political instability. However, The relationship between climate and societal collapse remains debated. Environmental stress alone rarely explains the rise or fall of civilizations. Human decisions matter too. Following the Akkadian period, Sumer experienced remarkable. Instead of disappearing, it recovered. The third dynasty of Ur, often called Ur, ushered in a renewed era of prosperity around 2100 BCE. Its rulers launched ambitious building programs. Temples were restored, canals repaired. Administration became increasingly organized. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets survive from this period, documenting everything from worker wages and livestock inventories to legal disputes and tax collection. These records provide an unusually detailed glimpse into everyday life nearly 4,000 years ago. We encounter farmers measuring grain, officials inspecting canals, merchants transporting goods, children learning to write, families buying property, workers receiving monthly rations. History suddenly feels personal, not because of kings, but because ordinary people left traces of ordinary lives. Yet beneath this impressive administrative machine lay growing pressures. Maintaining extensive irrigation networks demanded constant labor. According to archaeological research, centuries of intensive irrigation may have gradually increased soil salinity in parts of southern Mesopotamia. As water evaporated under the hot sun, dissolved salts remained in the soil. Over time, certain crops became more difficult to grow. Farmers increasingly shifted from wheat, which is relatively sensitive to salinity, toward barley, which tolerates salt more effectively. This agricultural adaptation demonstrates remarkable resilience, but it also hints at mounting environmental challenges. The rivers themselves refused to stay predictable. They course. Floods varied from year to year. Canals silted up. Every generation inherited a landscape that demanded constant engineering simply to preserve earlier achievements. Unlike civilizations protected by mountains or oceans, Sumer occupied an open plain. Armies could approach from multiple directions. Trade routes that brought prosperity also carried rivals. To the east lived peoples from the Zagros Mountains. To the west stretched vast deserts. To the north emerged ambitious kingdoms, eager to expand their influence. Prosperity attracted attention, and attention often invited conflict. Around 2004 BCE, the city of Ur suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of Elamite forces and their allies. Contemporary texts describe destruction, mourning, and political collapse. One famous literary composition, known as the Lament for Ur, portrays the city's downfall in deeply emotional language. Yet historians caution that such texts combine historical memory with religious interpretation. They were not neutral reports. They sought to explain tragedy through the beliefs of their time. Even so, they preserve something timeless: the grief of people watching their world change forever. After the fall of Ur, Sumer did not vanish overnight. Its cities continued to exist. People continued to farm, trade, worship, and write. Political power gradually shifted toward new kingdoms dominated by Akkadian-speaking rulers, including Babylon. The Sumerian language slowly faded from everyday conversation. But it did not disappear immediately. For centuries, it remained the language of scholarship, religion, and official learning, much as Latin continued to shape medieval Europe long after the Roman Empire had fallen. Civilizations rarely end with a single dramatic moment. They transform. Cultures blend. Languages evolve. Ideas survive in unexpected ways. The influence of Sumer reached astonishing distances across time. The wheel became increasingly widespread. Writing evolved into countless later systems. Mathematics advanced through the sexagesimal, or base 60, system, a legacy still visible today whenever we divide hours into 60 minutes or circles into 360 degrees. Legal traditions grew more sophisticated. Urban planning matured. State administration expanded. Schools trained professional scribes. Astronomical observations accumulated over generations. Many of the institutions we associate with civilization first took recognizable shape here. Yet perhaps Sumer's greatest invention was not writing, nor wheel, nor monumental architecture. It was the city itself, a place where strangers cooperated through shared rules rather than family ties alone, a place requiring administration, infrastructure, specialized labor, commerce, law, and collective identity. The city became humanity's greatest engine of innovation. It also became a source of new problems: crowding, political petition, resource management, social inequality, environmental pressure. Questions first confronted in Sumer continue to challenge cities around the world today. Modern archaeology continues revealing new pieces of this ancient puzzle. Satellite imagery, remote sensing, environmental studies, and fresh excavations allow researchers to reconstruct ancient canals, identify forgotten settlements, and better understand how landscapes changed over thousands of years. Each discovery refines earlier ideas. Sometimes long-held assumptions are confirmed. Sometimes they are challenged. That is the strength of historical research. It evolves with new evidence. One enduring question concerns why Sumer's political independence ultimately faded. Was climate the decisive factor? Did warfare exhaust the city-states? Did economic changes shift regional power elsewhere? Did environmental degradation slowly undermine agricultural productivity? Or was it a combination of many interconnected pressures rather than one catastrophic event? Most researchers today favor that broader explanation. Complex civilizations rarely collapse for a single reason. Instead, multiple stresses interact until resilience begins to fail. The story feels surprisingly familiar. Growing populations, resource demands, political rivalry, climate certainty, technological innovation, global trade, complex systems balancing opportunity against risk. Details changed. Human nature has not. Walking through the ruins of Ur today, it is easy to imagine silence. But 4,000 years ago, these streets echoed with merchants bargaining over copper, scribes pressing fresh clay tablets, children laughing outside homes, priests climbing temple stairways before sunrise, and farmers returning from irrigated fields carrying the promise of another harvest. These were not mythical figures. They were people with ambitions, fears, families, disagreements, celebrations, and dreams. People who believed their cities would endure. Like nearly every civilization before and after them, history reminds us that permanence is often an illusion. The cities of Sumer rose, because people solved extraordinary problems with extraordinary creativity. They fell not because they lacked intelligence, but because even remarkable societies must constantly adapt to changing environments, shifting politics, and unexpected challenges. Their achievements outlived their governments. Their ideas outlived their language. Their inventions outlived their cities. In many ways, every modern city carries a faint echo of those first experiments on the floodplains of Mesopotamia. The first bricks, the first accords, the first administrators, the first schools, the first cities. Their story is not simply about a civilization that disappeared. It is about the beginning of our own. And perhaps that is why the ruins of Sumer continue to captivate archaeologists, historians, and travelers alike. They are not merely remnants of a forgotten world. They are a mirror reflecting the earliest chapters of humanity's shared journey, filled with astonishing innovation, unexpected resilience, and constant change. If the world's first great cities could transform, adapt, and eventually fade while leaving ideas that still shape our lives today, what do you think is the most enduring legacy of the Sumerians? And what lessons should modern civilizations take from the rise and fall of the first cities?